So, you've just decided on your VTuber concept, and hopefully that means you found a niche within the content creation world to fill. And now it's time for the colorful, flashy part of it, your VTuber design. Now, you might be wondering or worrying, what is good VTuber design? How do you make sure your design is well received, memorable, and helps you to stand out amid hundreds of other VTubers? Well, I might just have some tips for you. Hi, I'm Iiji, and in my day job where I TA while I work on my master's, I get to teach the animators and fine artists of the future about character design, which ultimately is what VTuber design really is. So for my artists out there, I've got some ideas for you to keep in mind and some rough guidelines to follow in practice, but for the not so artistically inclined, worry not, as learning to recognize these aspects of effective character design will still help you to make sure you're guiding any artist you work with in a direction that will be the most beneficial to you. So real quick before we get into it, do understand that good character design is almost completely subjective. There is no wrong or right way to design, but there are more and less effective ways of doing it, so I usually say effective design as opposed to good. I will also be using the VTuber designs of others as examples. I will only speak to the positives of indie VTuber designs because I absolutely understand that indie VTubers are always making the absolute most of what resources they have, and it would be supremely unkind of me to critique them for that. On the other hand, I will be speaking maybe a little bit more freely of corporate VTuber designs, as agency talents often have little to no control over their designs, and ultimately it's the company's decision what they look like for the most part. With that said, I still also will not be voicing much in the way of critiques here either, because it's in poor taste to critique the work of others when they have not asked you to do so. Alright, so let's chat. I'm gonna be breaking VTuber design down into a couple of categories here. It's gonna be color palette, silhouette, complexity versus clarity, focal points, motif, and art style. This isn't a list in order of importance or anything, but it's more just a way to group ideas together for easier understanding. So first is your color palette. There are a lot of different kinds of palettes out there. You've got your monochromatic, analogous, complementary, and even some more other complicated ones as well, but we'll just stick to the basics here. Monochromatic palettes are ones where only variations in value of one color are present. They usually lend well to mature, refined, or clean looks. Some VTubers with monochromatic palettes include Monarch, Selen Tatsuki, and Eye Candy. Analogous palettes are ones where colors next to each other in the color wheel are chosen. They usually have a good sense of harmony and tend to be a bit bolder than monochromatic ones. I have an analogous palette, and some other VTubers with analogous palettes include Buff Pup and Millie Parfait. Complementary color palettes are ones with colors opposite to each other in the color wheel. They tend to be more bold and energetic or higher in contrast usually. Some examples of VTubers with complementary color palettes include Ina, Zentreya, and Gibara. If you're having trouble picking a color palette, Coolers is a really great tool for generating some inspiration, and you can also browse palettes that others have made too on there. I'll link it below if you'd like so you can check it out. If you're still having trouble looking for a simple but effective solution later on after, a color palette of black, white, and one other color also works really well. Vox is a really good example of this, how all of Luxium pretty much is. So there's no need for a super complicated palette to have successful color design, as you can see. Good color choices alone aren't the end of color design though. The proportioning and placement of the colors can also make or break a design and be just as important. Many designs, for this reason, abide by what's called the 60-30-10 rule when it comes to color proportioning and placement. This guideline explains that there should be a dominant color given priority, a second color given slightly less prevalence, and an accent color reserved for focal points, where the numbers in the name refer to the percentages of each color in the overall design. This is a very simplified understanding of color layout, but we can take the idea and expand it for a larger palette here. So if I use Zentreya as an example, she's probably roughly about like 50% black, 35% red, 10% white, and 5% green. Does that make 100 maybe? This makes the green elements really pop, and all of the white being concentrated in her face really draws your eye to it. The actual percentages here don't matter so much, but having a clear hierarchy in the amounts of each color is the goal. My other suggestion on color placement is what we call bottom weighting. This is a common practice in the fine arts and for composition, especially in digital art and traditional art that's 2D, but the idea is that by placing darker colors at the bottom of a design, it will make it feel grounded. This also helps to shift the focal point to the upper half of the character and off of the feet, unless that's what you're into, I guess. So, moving on, next we're going to talk about your silhouette. Silhouette is the shape of the outside edge of a character, and you can test yours by filling your design in with black and determining if it's distinct enough that your character could be identified by it alone. Most of your cartoony video game characters benefit from strong silhouettes, so you definitely can too. So let's play a game real quick. Who are these guys? If you were able to guess Picora, Haruka, and Dia, you'd be right. They all have distinct silhouettes because of their hair, ears, clothing shapes, and proportions. Holly and Bales are also good examples of this. The recipe for an effective silhouette is keeping shape contrast in mind. This means placing straight lines next to curved ones on the exterior of the form, wide parts near thin parts, and gaps between items so that the silhouette has some holes in it. There are also a couple pitfalls to avoid in silhouette design that I want to mention because I see them quite often, but they are completely avoidable. The first is what we call bullet head. This is a term I've heard Vroid and 3D artists use the most, but it's where the top of the head is completely smooth and the hair in the back just kind of connects the silhouette to the shoulders. It's like a bullet. Not very descriptive. You can do better. Add some flyaways, some tendrils, some shapes. Make the head stand out. Notice how most of my examples that I gave before have distinct hair shapes or something like ears, bows, or something else that stands out from the shape of the skull. And that's what makes it successful. Second, on the topic of hair is what I'd like to call the long hair problem. Can you tell who this is? Well, it's not actually someone specific, that would be mean, but could be any one of a pretty large number of VTubers who have long, fluffy hair that completely obscures their silhouette. If the hair is a distinct shape or a very different color or value than the body in front of it, this can still work okay from a design standpoint. Onigiri is a good example of a solution to this because her hair, while it's long, does fade to a lighter color behind her, which provides the illusion of her silhouette being that of her body and not that of her hair. Most VTubers are also only ever seen from the waist up, majority of the time, so super long hair that's never seen isn't always really great for this reason either. My final tip for good silhouettes is related to something called ladder design. If you draw a ladder next to a character and we place a rung at each point that there is a major horizontal division in the character, it should not be one that you would like to climb. This helps to make the silhouette more varied and dynamic. Things can kind of feel stiff or boring otherwise, and often this occurs due to the convenience of making VTuber designs symmetrical for the sake of art and rigging. But it can really hold a design back sometimes. And adding just one element that breaks that horizontal movement and symmetry, like, a sloping belt or different height socks or something else, can really help to avoid ladder design. Next, we'll move on to complexity and clarity, which are two things that kind of work hand in hand. Complexity refers to the level of detail in a design, and clarity refers to how well a design reads, especially when an image is smaller or far away. There's a delicate balance between these ideas where we want your design to be detailed enough to be interesting, but not so much that it's distracting. If someone is watching your stream on their phone, will your design hold up at that tiny scale? A lot of VTuber designs suffer from being over-detailed and can become confusing to look at from a distance. It'd be kind of rude to give examples, but I'm sure you can think of designs that were overwhelming or confusing to look at because they just had too much going on. The way I like to test whether a design has enough clarity is what I'd call the marketable plush test. You draw a version of the character with chibi proportions and simplified enough shapes that it could be manufactured into a plush, all while the character very clearly, obviously retains its identity. If not, you might want to hit the drawing board again. Sometimes when I'm designing characters, I will plushify them, and then reverse engineer them from that, adding only a couple small details back in after, just in order to make sure that I'm not over detailing it. The second thing I suggest for clarity is borrowing from the approach of the artists who design Pokemon. Pokemon are usually intentionally designed to have clear, simple shapes so that kids can draw them, or something that resembles them, without too much of a struggle. This is a genuine strategy that has been discussed by the Pokemon design teams, and it's a pretty smart strategy. Fan artists can always make something more detailed, but facing drawing a complicated design can be really intimidating, especially if you have a younger audience or for artists who are newer or just starting out. Finally, consistency is the last thing I'd suggest to keep in mind when working towards design clarity. Consistent level of line weight, shading detail, and style can go a long ways for clarity. Avoid mixing lined and unlined portions, solely cel-shaded and smooth-shaded sections, and hyper-realistic and cartoony sections, as it can make the design feel kind of disjointed. Next, we'll move on to focal points. As your VTuber will probably only mostly be seen from the waist up, it's a good idea to focus your details and emphasis colors on this half of the body. Furthermore, as people, we tend to look for a connection in art, and it's something we can relate to, and that's something we usually find in the face. So above all else, the face, especially the eyes, eyebrows, and mouth, should be focal points, especially because they are the key elements that you will be eventually using to express yourself with when you have a model of your design. Drawing focus to the face can be achieved through things like color contrast, level of detail, and proportions. Color contrast, as I mentioned before when talking about palettes, can be a great tool for emphasis. If you have a color that only shows up on the upper half of the body or is mostly centered on the eyes and face, it can work really well to draw the eye. Fuwawa and Mokoko are great examples of this. They each only feature each other's main color in their eyes, and as a result, their eyes are kind of naturally a focal point to us. helps us track their expressions, and it just makes them feel more lively. Color contrast is also one reason that bright hair colors work well. They pull the eye to the upper half of the design, and the usually somewhat oval gap in color where the face is kind of stands out as a result. Kyo and Aster are examples of this, where their brightly colored hair draws our attention, but it also causes our eyes to search for a less intense place to rest. That being their more neutrally toned faces. This idea is also part of the reason you see so many pale complexion characters with darker hair and darker complexion characters with lighter hair. That contrast can be desirable in a design. For these reasons, I would highly suggest not making the face and hair too similar in color or value, because having low contrast between them detracts from their emphasis and will make them more likely to just kind of dissolve together at a distance. Level of detail can also be used to emphasize different parts of your design. For example, if you have more of it in the character's face and items around the face than the rest of the body, the viewer's eye will gravitate towards those higher detailed areas. This is a skill often used in 2D art, as it's a really good compositional tool. If shoes, belts, or other accessories are outcompeting the face and detail level, they may draw the eye away, which isn't necessarily what we want. For using proportions as an emphasis, anime-style eyes and heads already kind of help us out with this. The larger-than-life aspects like these draw our attention and is one of the reasons why chibis are so expressive. There's really not much to them other than their faces. One thing I would note here though is that while anime styles are usually good from the eyes and head size, some anime styles can suffer from the way that they de-emphasize the lips and eyebrows. These are key elements that your character will use to express themselves, so make them stand out. A little shading, even just on the upper lip, and eyebrows that are thicker than one line and can be seen through the hair in some way can really go a long way in helping a design be more expressive. Maybe think twice about single line lips and small mouths and very thin eyebrows completely hidden by hair. Next, we'll move on to discussing motifs. Motif is an element that gains importance and meaning through repetition. This is usually something you'll hear about in your high school English class, but it's a useful visual design tactic as well. A lot of the most memorable VTuber designs succeed because of this. I'm gonna show you a motif real quick, and I'm almost certain you'll know whose it is pretty much immediately. Yeah, it's Gargur. I don't even know why I asked. You probably know. Her design is so iconic, and we've come to associate her so strongly with this imagery that it'll call her to mind all on its own. One reason this works is because this imagery repeats throughout her design and branding. It's on her logo, her dress, her hair clips, and more. Repetition provides some harmony and unity to her design, and when we see it so many times, it really enforces this in our minds. This is a more visually obvious type of motif or symbol, as it's the same exact imagery repeated with minimal changes, but there's also a less obvious way of doing it if this feels too on the nose for you. If you've seen my video on standing out as a VTuber, you probably won't be surprised to hear I'm bringing onigiri back as an example here. Onigiri's motif is onigiri the food, which is reinforced not just by her name, but also by her color design and her silhouette. The top of her shirt resembles the shape and color placement of onigiri, as does the silhouette of her hair, and the way the lighter inside of it frames her dark socks. This is a much more subtle approach, but it goes a long ways to make her design memorable, even if we might not immediately realize why or how. If you're deciding on a motif, it can be helpful to consider your VTuber's concept. Is there any kind of iconography that be related to their species, occupation, or personality? And in what way can you make that iconography distinctly yours? This is an opportunity to do a little bit of research, and don't be afraid to draw some inspiration from some logos or symbols you find online, but make sure you change them up enough for them to be distinctly your own. Finally, I'd like to quickly mention art styles in our chat about character design. I covered a bit about this in my previous video, but I want to briefly repeat what I said before. While the status quo in VTubing is definitely your classic anime-style models, deviation from this idea can really help your design to stand out. Indie VTubers like Pumpkin Potion, Kimrai, Cabal, Heavenly Father, and a lot of others, in my opinion at least, are benefiting from standing apart from the crowd style-wise. You'll notice that these are mostly 3D VTubers I've listed, and that's probably because there are a lot more 3D artists who are well-versed and used to working in less anime styles than live 2D artists are. But don't let this deter you. Even if you aren't interested in straying away from anime styles, there's still a lot of variation within them to think about too. You have your softer, more airbrush styles like Fairy Sammy and Moonbitch, and your contrastier, cel-shaded styles like Onsta and Starpy. As you can see here, there's still a pretty extreme range in anime styles, so don't be afraid to mess around or search out an artist who has a more distinct style. Also be a good idea to match the art style of your design to your concept or personality, but you don't have to. Sometimes if they are kind of at odds with each other, this can also be a fun selling point. One final note on art styles, which is only mildly tangential, is that some of them work better or worse in live 2D or 3D modeling, depending on what route you want to go as a VTuber. There are certainly 2D and 3D artists who can excel in all styles and make lovely one-to-one models of anything. But understand that these will be pricier models, rightfully so. Higher levels of detail and more realistic styles are much more work. The general rule of thumb is that the less realistic your model is, the easier it usually is to translate well into live 2D or 3D. This is why your super stylized pixel art models and chibi models are so much more affordable most of the time too. Things that are too realistic can also sometimes end up feeling uncanny, especially if they aren't modeled or rigged right. For example, like the way that Iris's 1.0 model was rigged in comparison to her somewhat more realistic style and her soft shaded nose. There are definitely artists who can rig these more complicated, more realistic styles, but if you're looking to keep your budget down, more stylized and less realistic is definitely the ticket there. So after going through all of that, you might be thinking, whoa, that's a lot. And it is. But here's the thing. If you're an artist just starting out, take it one thing at a time. If you set out to make a design with a really great silhouette, you can always come back to the color palette and beef it up later if it isn't feeling right to you. Learning character design's a process, so be kind to yourself and kind of set goals along the way of, today we're gonna work on silhouette, and today's color palette, you know, that kind of stuff. And if you aren't an artist, I hope you found some more appreciation for just how much work artists and character designers go through and are doing to support their clients. All in all, I hope this video was helpful for y'all, and I hope to get some wheels turning. If there are any more VTubing or art-related topics you'd like me to discuss, you are welcome to leave me a comment. And if you'd like my 2 cents in your character design, my DMs on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now, they're always open. Good luck on your VTubing journey, everyone. Farewell!